Good evening and welcome to Dog Talk. I'm Dan Camilleri. Co-host Laura is tied up tonight, but we'd like to start by thanking Enduro for their support and bringing you our weekly Q&A. Tonight, we're fortunate enough to be speaking to Pat Stuart from Operant Canine and the Canine Paradigm. Pat will be picking who he thinks has asked the best question of the night, and they will win a bag of Enduro high-energy food for working dogs with real kangaroo meat. Obviously, I haven't said that enough times. How you going, Pat?
Hey, mate. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us, mate. How was your day?
Good. Big day. I took on a new premises today, getting all moved in, setting up. It's been a great day.
Beautiful, mate. What are your plans there, Pat?
Mate, it's actually it's not just a dog training facility. It's going to be more of a like a studio. I've got it in my head that I want to make a new online course, and so this premises is going to sort of double as a place where I train, but then also like a dedicated space to film and put together a new online course that my current online course is just, it was COVID and I had a bunch of videos like everybody else. And so I put them together and called it an online course. And that's been great. And people have been really supportive and it's gotten a lot of good feedback. But I want to take it more seriously and make something a bit more complete and a bit more structured and something that actually is designed to educate people, like, from start to finish, rather than just like, hey, here's all the content that I have. So yeah, that's the plan. That started work on that today.
Beautiful. Congratulations, mate. I'm
Thanks,
sure you
mate.
succeed in that.
Thank
So,
you.
for the people out there that don't know Pat Stewart, mate, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, mate. So my name's Pat. I'm a dog trainer. I have been doing it full time professionally for about 8 years. I was in the army for 12 and a half years before that. I was at 2 Commando Regiment. Pretty much straight out of school, joined the army and went. I was part of the pilot program, what they called the direct entry to special forces, and so I did that and got in there and did a bunch of deployments sort of all around the world. And then along the way, sort of took up dogs as a bit of a hobby and a passion. And then towards the back end of my military career was sort of, I was somewhat involved with the working dog program within my unit. We were kind of late to bring in dogs. And then I took a pretty decent injury sort of at the back end of my career there. And so when it was time to get out, I decided to do dogs full time. So I've been doing that ever since. Within the dog space, I sort of work, I started out in pets like everybody does sort of when you come onto it. And then as sort of luck and fortune favored me, a few people, I had started a podcast with a good friend of mine, Glenn Cook, called the Canine Paradigm. And that sort of gave access people to me and my knowledge and stuff. And so now I'm quite lucky. I don't deal so much in pets. It's more, I deal in people who are training dogs for a purpose, and that's pretty broad spectrum. I enjoy bite sports and police and military type work. I prep those kind of dogs quite a bit, but the coaching within that dog training space is not really limited to that. It's pretty broad. It's basically anybody who thinks that my knowledge can maybe plug a gap in theirs and help them be more successful with their dog.
Awesome, man. Can you talk about your time in the army at all?
Yeah,
There?
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, probably. What do you want to know?
No, they're cool because you were a sniper, right?
Mate, so my last job was I was the sniper platoon sergeant. But sniping was it's kind of weird. It wasn't my thing being a sniper. I ran the sniper cell, but it wasn't my sort of dedicated. I'm not. So yes, like yes, I'm a sniper, but I'm not like a sniper guy. It's not my area of specialty. I was in charge of the snipers.
But obviously, that's someone that has to control emotion and regulate breathing and whatnot. So, mate, how did you time in that? Like, how did that make you a better handler and why?
Mate, I think everything I did in the army, especially within that unit. So, that unit is it's pretty selective. You get 160 odd guys will turn up to a selection course, and 20 or 30 will finish, and 15 to 20 will actually become commandos. So the barrier to entry is pretty high. And my time sort of within that space generally, certainly did prepare me for life with dogs. I think the main thing I learned is patience, to be honest. Like patience is a huge part of it. It's you can't rush things that just take time. Time takes time. And that's one of the main things that I think that I carry over from the army, as well as, sort of, a professionalism that doesn't go away when people aren't watching. You know, it's the doing the right thing when nobody else is going to know except for you. I think that's been one of the main things that's really helped me out with the dog career.
So structure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and just carrying that into whatever you do. Like,
Mm.
you are you a pretty methodical kind of guy?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a bit, you know, maybe problematically at times.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. And I think my issue is like not my issue, but one of the things certainly of my personality is that I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of guy. So like I definitely have some like obsessive compulsive tendencies.
Yeah.
And once I set a goal, it's pretty hard to derail me from that goal.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you got an objective in mind. You just,
Yeah.
and you bring that into not just what you do, but also in what you want to achieve for your particular dog at the time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like to an extent, right? So like one of the things I constantly kind of find myself saying to police and military handlers is, you know, this dog doesn't know he's in the army. This dog doesn't know he's a cop. And so, you know, you have to work within the capability of the dog, the interests of the dog, the drives of the dog, all that kind of stuff. But for sure, I want to set a standard and, you know, have the dog work towards that or have me help the dog work towards that or the handler or whatever, for sure.
It's funny you mentioned because I know you don't know a lot of like have had a lot of exposure to stock work.
Hmm.
We had a bloke on. Actually, if you love a yarn, Dan
Okay.
Matthews Milo, fantastic bloke, and we have classes and what we can do, which I'm sure you do in your own
Hmm.
sport. And he entered one of his dogs, which was a maiden dog, into like an open once, and a
Okay.
bloke goes, "Why are you doing that for? Like, it's open." And he goes, "Shh, I haven't told the dog that he's not an open dog. Like, he can still have a crack." And I think
Yeah,
he ended up
yeah.
going good. So 100%. I suppose that comes back to putting human values on a dog too, right?
Totally, yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the things like, you know, can hold ourselves to a high standard of discipline and stuff like that. And you can know, like, me and this dog are going to achieve X, Y, Z, and the repercussions of not doing that are whatever. But you can't put that on the dog. You can't. And I think that the people who like they can't understand that for starters, but also like it's not helpful. They're just acting on impulses. They're doing the training. They're performing the tasks that we've shown them within the capability that they can understand it. All those sorts of things have to come into play. And I think when people try and hold the dog to a standard, it really, you know, it's yourself. You as the handler and the trainer are the ones that need to be held to a standard. The dogs just do what the dogs do, and it's up to us to communicate to them what we want them to do and have them understand it.
100%. They're not purposely being pricks, right?
Well, sometimes it can feel that way. That's for sure.
It can be, mate. Speaking of, like, do you remember your first dog?
My first ever dog that I have.
Your first ever dog, yeah.
Yeah, I think actually, one of my first ever memories is, I'm not sure whether I'm making this up because there's a photo of it, but I kind of vaguely remember the photo being taken of me and like the dog we had when I was a kid, when I was a really young baby. And I was probably 2.5 when the photo was taken. And like, I've got the
Yeah.
photo and I vaguely remember it taking it. So yeah, or I'm making that up. I saw the photo and have put myself into that position.
What
Yeah.
about working dog, mate? Who was your first working dog?
Mate, my first ever Mallee that I had. So we had border collies growing up, and then when I was in the army, we had this kind of mongrel border collie that was really my wife's dog because I was gone so much. And after I was exposed to a military working dog overseas, like I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to be embedded with a coalition force that had a working dog, a military working dog that took a pretty serious bite. It was still to this day probably the most significant live bite I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it was the first I'd ever seen. And so I immediately got home from that deployment and was like, "Oh, I got to get one of these. I need one of these dogs." And you know, it was a baptism by fire. I had no idea what I was doing in reality, and I had a really, really, he was a really dangerous dog, like really, really dangerous. And it took me a little while to really understand why and understand how he got to that point. And there was a lot of bad training involved because he was an adult dog when I got him. There was a lot into that, but yeah, mate, I'll never forget that dog. That was baptism by fire, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah. How old? You mentioned he was an old dog. How old was that particular dog?
He was about 14 months when I got him, roughly, I think. I'm
Yeah.
not 100% sure, but yeah, that's what he seemed like. And I wanted a puppy. Like, what happened was I sort of had this experience overseas with a working dog and just was enamored by it and just absolutely was obsessed. I wanted to get into it. And my my dog was this old, I think he was like 15 at the time, and he could barely walk, and he was on the way out. So all my interest in dogs and my training of dogs was theoretical. Like it was 100%. I'm
Yeah.
reading books, I'm watching videos. This is before the internet was what it is now. So the access to information wasn't the same. There was still plenty of information, right? But not the same way you could get to it these days. And so I sort of indoctrinated myself a little bit down a path that wasn't very helpful, because it was all theory based. And then when I got this dog, I was just like, holy shit, none of this is working, And that's like, that was the catalyst to really start investigating properly, really coming to understand dog training, to the extent that I do now, was all triggered by that dog. I talk about how I'm very lucky actually that he was such a disaster, because otherwise it just would have been another flash in the pan hobby. If he'd been
Yeah.
if he'd been great and there were no issues, it would have been another thing that I just ticked the box of and moved on. But because of all the work that I had to do, it was, mate, it was horrendous. He was a big problem of a dog.
He
Um,
forced you to learn, right?
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's why I always say my intro to dogs really was baptism by fire. I jumped in that fire, but I still had to figure out my way out.
So what was it about the theory-based stuff that kind of just went out the window, I suppose, is what was that?
Yeah, mate. I think I still feel pretty strongly about this, and I sort of teach it when I teach at the seminar. So I think when you're just reading books and you're digesting media that is not video, right? So like when you've got one group of people saying to train a dog, all you need is positive reinforcement. There's no reason to use any pressure. There's no compulsion is totally unnecessary. The idea of pain compliance is disgusting. All that kind of stuff. When you got one group of people saying that, and another group saying, no, that's not true, you do need to do those things, but they both claim to have the same evidence. And without getting your hands on that evidence, I still feel pretty like okay with the fact that I was very much plugged into the sort of force-free community to start with. And I was really into it. And I love the idea that training dogs without any form of pressure, any form of compulsion was the way to do it. And to be honest, that dog, I trained that dog to a very, very high standard. But I could get him to do really cool stuff, but I couldn't get him to stop doing the stuff that he was,
Yeah.
he was so dangerous. And so, I had stuck at it for a long time, and I was really deep into that community and was looking for support, and it just wasn't there, and I had dog trainers come around the house and really not tell me anything that I wasn't already doing, and basically say like, well, we don't know what to do here at this point. Right. And so that's when I was like, well, I'm going to look at these other people. Like, I'm not giving up. And, very, really quickly, I've got him under control. And then, that became a catalyst to like, I became what my mentor Bart would call like a popo nade trainer. So like I trained everything with positive reinforcement, and I was happy to use punishment, but I still really didn't fully understand or was willing to use like pressure to learn, sort of straight
Yeah.
negative reinforcement. Right. And it took me a while, like several years, to come around to that and get good at that. And so like, it's been a real evolution along the way, and sort of not just, learning the stuff, but having to come to terms with the idea of that it's not only necessary, but like, it's not the evil that my initial imprinting
Well,
told me that it was.
absolutely. And do you feel that like maybe he thought little things were overwhelming because he didn't know how to deal with a little bit of pressure, or more so than
Yeah.
what you?
Or the dog.
Yeah.
Man, I think the dog just had a really bad development. Like, knowing what I know now, I think that he was a Malinois, and he was, this is 15 years ago or something. So like, it was at a time when they weren't that popular and not many people really knew how to raise one. And I think that he wasn't like, I'd never found out his exact bloodline, but sort of looking at him and knowing bloodlines like I know now and knowing where he came from, I can make some pretty good guesses. And so he probably wasn't a very strong nerve dog, but I think more than anything, it was the development that probably he was taught the world's dangerous. Like, defend yourself right from the jump. And then what he wasn't really taught was like how to discern what is dangerous and what's not. And so he was the kind of dog that just went on the offensive straight away. Never to me, which is lucky, I suppose. Never to me or my wife, but to everybody else, he was. I don't know. Can I swear here? He was.
Yeah, go
He
down.
was a fucking dangerous dog. Like, he was a lot. But we got him under control, and he was managed throughout his life. He was never going to be like my current dog, who is, a different animal altogether, though they look similar.
Yep.
Different thing altogether.
It's funny that, right? Like something looks similar, but they're not the same on the inside, right?
Nah, completely different.
Mate, actually, that leads into a question here from Nikki West. She goes, "What's your opinion on the importance of understanding puppy development for handlers in any working dog field, and and how we start conditioning, how the mother imprints on the pup in its first few weeks of life?"
Yeah. Um, Puppy development is this wild thing that I've sort of gone like full circle on. So I didn't understand it, so I didn't do a lot of it. And then I understood it, so I did tons of it. And then I realized I was doing too much of it, so I didn't do a lot of it. And now I'm sort of landed back there. And so I have this thing. It's a big part of the course I want to make is not just like what in the working dog space and sort of the biting dog space. There's a lot of emphasis on getting dogs gripping correctly and setting the grip and exposure and all this kind of stuff. And no, that's true. But what I've really come to terms with in puppy development is the most important things with puppies is that they understand that they're safe. And I've seen a lot of people, through trying to strengthen a puppy and trying to develop a puppy into being their ultimate dog, that they have this vision of what they're going to be. I think, and I've been guilty of this. I'm not saying that I haven't fallen into this trap, but what I think happens quite a lot is people in the dog space who come in with their first dog, and then, that dog does well or whatever. It's their trial dog. But then the next dog they get, that's going to be the dog they make an impact with. And they overdo it with that dog, right? So like they're putting too much pressure on that dog. And I don't necessarily mean even always like physical pressure. It can be emotional pressure and pressure of expectation. Absolutely. And so what I think of puppy development is it's super important, but I also think that the most important thing, like I have these sort of check boxes that I think is most important. And I think the first is that little puppy believes that it's safe and that someone loves it. I think that's probably the most important. And then I start exposing that puppy to the world or any, the any environment that it's ever going to be expected to work within. I'm going to start exposing it to that, but in small increments and in a way that shows it like, hey, this is just normal. This is not, don't make a big deal about this environment, whatever it is. And then after that, I can start saying, well, okay, like these are some of the specific skills that are going to set you up for the remainder of your life. But I think that sequence is most important. And I think that sometimes that's what everybody does. There's nothing groundbreaking in those three things, right? But I think that making sure that they're in that order is probably the most important thing. And what we see, I'm interested, mate, whether it's identifiable in your world, but like in the biting dogs world, you really don't know shit about a dog when it's a puppy, right? And there's strong evidence of that. That they did the Super Dog program in America, and basically they determined that you can't tell shit about a puppy and its suitability to actually turn out for the job at 8 weeks old. You can't make any real decisions, and so that's if you know the bloodline and you know really well, and you know these traits, and you've seen that mating happen before, you can start to make much more educated guesses. But I think that when you just look at a 8, 10, 12-week-old puppy, I've seen some potatoes turn into killers, and I've seen some killers turn into potatoes. Like it goes both ways. And so for me, I put in a lot of sort of time, effort, and thought into just sort of trying to steer the ship where I want it, rather than sort of trying to drive it too hard.
No, absolutely. And just like I suppose to answer what you asked me back there was, obviously we rely heavily on genetics. Like if we want a dog that's good in the paddock, well, we're going to go to someone that predominantly has paddock dogs, or someone that is a yard dog or a cattle dog. We're going to kind of drift that way. And we got a litter of pups here at the moment that we bred for ourselves because we want a couple of bitches, and we look at them and we're watching the traits, and like something that comes forward with a bit of punch and wants to fight its brothers, and then ones that sit back and think, and even when they play, something that goes sideways before it comes forwards, and we go, all right, well, it might have these traits, but over the next 12 weeks of development to the next 12 months, that could flip on its head compared to its experiences and associations it has, right?
Totally,
100.
yeah. And mate, that's one of the things. Like I used to do it professionally. Like I used to charge people, and now I don't, because I find it so stressful in like sourcing puppies for people. And the problem is you just don't know, right? Like you just don't know how it's going to pan out. And in Australia, the problem we face, especially with Malinois, is it's a young breed, and so there aren't a lot of repeat matings, and there aren't a lot of really stable bloodlines. There aren't many of people who have like a family bloodline where you can count on a particular thing happening. And so the role of genetics, while super, super important, absolutely, it's kind of hard to pick here in Australia because we're most of the Mallees that are being bred are outcrossers, and so there's a lot of genetic variance in it that it could go either way. So you just got to make your best guess, and I think also like one of the things that I find super stressful is, like puppies change every minute. They're a different creature. And so, you can go and assess a litter and you can come up with a 1 to 10 of who you would like from the litter based on the traits that you see. And you can test that same litter in the afternoon and you'll get a different order. And
Yeah,
so, like,
100%.
I
Yeah.
think, and that's true of any litter of any set of dogs, right? Like they can, even a uniform litter, there's going to be minor variances and it's going to depend who ate more at the last meal or who ran around, who got the zoomies and ran around and now presents as flat, but actually he's the highest drive dog because he did the most and now he's tight. Like there's just no way to
I
know. So it's
have to spend
stressful.
a bit of time observing those pups over a period of
Totally.
time, right? And
Exactly.
you touched on strengthening pups there. Do you want to in your field when you talk about strengthening, how do you classify that?
Man, I think like for really it's recovery for us. I think most dogs sort of people agree is that like novelty is going to be interesting to a young dog no matter what. And it's the way not necessarily the way that they first react to any stimulus, but the way they recover. And so for us, for sure, strengthening is super important because they don't know anything. They don't know shit. They're puppies. They don't know anything. And so you got to
Yeah,
start
sure.
exposing them to stuff and saying like, hey, this is not something you should be worried about. But if for some reason they are, then you show them like, hey, this isn't of concern to you. This isn't something that could hurt you, could harm you. You approach it, turn off the pressure by going at it rather than fleeing from it, and really trying to develop that open, social, forward type dog that I think is for the most part, I think no matter like in working dog circles, like I think that's the key criteria that everybody's looking for. I then like, oh, I like them to bite stuff as well, like and
Yeah,
like we can add our specifics after that, but open social and forward is I think really what we're after all the time.
absolutely, man. Nikki's always also asked, what age would you leave the pups with their mother until and why?
It's a good question. So I typically don't have a lot of say in that. I don't breed, right? So I don't
Yeah,
breed dogs. So that's up to a breeder. But I've seen a lot of success with working dogs that are separated as early as 6 weeks. Certainly not before that. And 6 weeks is probably even a little bit early. But I think traditionally, we separate dogs from their litter mates and their mother at 8 weeks. But in all honesty, all the litters that I've assessed over time, and there's been a few, they usually look their best at that 7 week mark. And then, of course, there's
yeah,
variances on that, but that for sure. I do get concerned when they're allowed to hang with their litter mates past 8 weeks. That tends to worry me. I think in my experience, they often then sort of become a bit, as ridiculous as this sounds, like a bit doggy. They
yep,
identify with dogs too much and they enjoy the company of other dogs more than I want them to. So that's why I've found sort of the earlier that 6 weeks mark. I wouldn't want one that early, but I've certainly have taken puppies as early as that, and they really become sort of very neutral to other dogs very easily, and they become much more affiliative. But
yep.
again, I don't know whether that was just the individuals that I had. I
I
think
did.
that's one of the main things as well. Like at the moment, I'm raising the second set of brothers that I've done. Had another set before, and I love doing that because it just shows that genetic variance. Like
Yeah,
these are litter mate brothers and they're nothing alike. And that's happened with the last two where they're genuinely, aside from that they look similar, then personality wise is absolutely nothing alike. And their development and imprinting, everything has been identical. And so I think that's always a little bit of a kick in the teeth, like we often say like, oh, look what a good job I did. It's like, mate, that it was gonna go that way.
That's
You
just the
just
genetics, right?
yeah, exactly. It was gonna go that way no matter what you did.
We're all products of nature and nurture, right? Our genetics,
Yeah,
our DNA, and our
totally.
education. Like,
Yeah,
you,
totally.
sometimes we enhance it, and sometimes we kind of suppress it, or off, set it off its tracks a bit.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
and you mentioned genetics a bit there, and and like it's only your best guess, right? And
Yeah.
that's all it is. It's a game of numbers, and one of the best three sheeper in the country. I was fortunate enough to learn a lot from him, and the advice he gave to me was, well, you can breed two thoroughbreds and get a donkey, but you can breed two donkeys and get a real good racehorse too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just a gamble.
Totally. And it's like, again, to harp on it, especially in this country for Malinois, like my breed,
Yep.
it's hard because it's a new breed. It's only been in the country like 30, 35 years, something like that. So uh, there aren't that many people that really have an established bloodline where you can count on getting something, like where their parents are, closely aligned in type. There
Yeah.
aren't many breedings like that happening. So it's tricky.
Mate, speaking of, are you concerned with where the Malinois are going to head in this country?
Um, in what way?
I'll put it this way: I'm getting people that cannot handle a dog to rock up with Malinois.
Mm,
I'm getting people that are competent as well rock up with Malinois, but a lot of people that they watch these movies and they go, "These dogs are highly trained," and then they watch like some of these war movies or whatever they may
yeah.
be, or YouTube clips of these dogs climbing walls, and they go,
Mhm.
"Oh, I can make that happen." But the truth is, I wouldn't give these guys a pet rock.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And then they're going to go off and then they want to breed dogs. They're like,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute. I think within 5 to 10 years, personally, the new Staffy will be a Malinois. Like the pounds will be
Mm,
full of them.
yeah.
Unfortunately.
Mate, it's quite possible. I have mixed feelings about it. Like in one way, I very much agree, and I am concerned. Um, and in another, I'm not at all. Another, I'm like, let people do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Like I had no business buying a Malinois when I did. I didn't have a fucking clue what I was doing, and here we
Yeah.
are. You know, so like I feel like how do you gatekeep that? And I think the main thing is, um, education. I think that having the people's access to good trainers and good information is important. My bigger concern is access to the training. Like, I think that
Yeah.
my concern is as the tools are being banned and that types of training is, being harder and harder to do. Bite work, for example, it's illegal in Melbourne. Our heads are on the chopping block in the biting dog world. Like, I think that, at the time's ticking. And so the number of people who really know how to do it is small, and the number of people getting into it is even smaller because you can see there's no longevity in this where it's going to go. And so that's my real concern is that for the more and more people who are getting Malinois because they saw John Wick or whatever,
Yeah.
I'm like, fuck yeah, awesome, come around, like get into it, learn how to train, do a sport, train your dog to as high a standard as you can. But there aren't many people who know how to do that, and so these dogs, especially if you get a very powerful one, they're that they solve problems with their mouth. For the most
Yeah.
part, with those kind of Mallies, you don't really teach them to bite. You teach them when and when to
Yeah.
bite, right? Rather than how. They know how to do that. And so it's more like that's my concern is people's access to information and good training. Not so much that the dog, I think that I don't know. Like I say, I just hasten to be like, no, you shouldn't get them because I remember myself Googling Malinois Sydney and buying one from the first hit, and then you know what I mean, and then
Yeah.
going like, okay, fuck, I have to figure this out now.
We got one. What do we do with it now?
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully my phone, I'm the second call after the after that first one. Yeah.
But I will jump back out in a sec. But you mentioned obviously your most influential dog was that first one you had.
Mm.
You learned a lot. But how about influential people? You mentioned about access to training and
Mhm.
trainers. How about influential people like to help
Um,
you get you to where you are?
yeah, man, I've had a couple of incredible. I've been a very lucky person my whole life. I've fallen into
You make your own luck, mate.
yeah, well, maybe, but I've fallen into training with some of the best in the world. So I started out with the guy Sam Monsey. He was he was a military policeman that got brought into my unit to raise the dog capability. And Sam, is arguably sort of one of the best dogmen in the country. I'd say he's incredible. So I was lucky to be able to learn under Sam for as long as I did, and he was probably the biggest, probably the most influential because it was an early stage in my career of learning, right? And so like I had the most to learn at that point, and so I learned that from him. But then beyond that, I got tied up with Bart Bellin, who's arguably in the working dog, as in biting dog space, he's arguably best in the world. That's an impossible thing to measure,
Yeah.
but if it could be done, he's definitely in the top handful. Bart was a mentor for me for, probably the last 5-6 years, something like that, or probably longer, actually, maybe 7 or 8 years. And that's been an incredible relationship. His system is Nipopo. I learned that from him early in the phase of him teaching it in a really detailed manner beyond seminars, and then went on to be a teacher of that myself and traveled the world teaching that. So like Bart has for sure been, probably the key person of influence in my career. That's for sure.
No worries. Actually, I will touch on knee popo for a second
Mhm.
there, but no, and I suppose influences like that in our lives, they're very important, right? Like they
Totally.
kind of
Totally.
can
Well,
we can be
mate, the
on
thing
one
is,
path and then all of a sudden,
yeah, the thing is, like, knowledge is a relay race. You're meant to fucking carry the baton and pass on to the next person. And and
I love
and
that.
Bart certainly has been that more than I think anyone else. And so uh of Bart, like, it's an expensive school that he runs and all that, but like Bart gives everything to everyone who asks for it. So he uh for me was this incredible teacher, and beyond teaching me how to work with dogs, was very clear that he was also teaching me how to teach others how to work with dogs. Like that was very clear in our relationship from the start, that this is stuff that has to be spread around and passed on. And so I was hugely lucky to basically be able to piggyback off of his 45 years of experience. And so rather than having to make all those mistakes myself, of course you have to make some yourself,
Yeah,
right? But
but you
I
start here instead of
yeah,
here.
exactly. And then beyond the knowledge and capability he gave to me, he also lent me some of his credibility, by allowing me to use his brand and teach his brand, which is not like it's a proprietary name. He owns the name
Yeah,
Nipopo, not the system. As he will tell you, Russian gypsies have been teaching bears with Nipopo for 300 years. It's not new.
yeah,
But articulating it in the way that he does, and now many, many, many other people do, is what's
yeah.
new.
Actually, we won't worry about my structure. We'll come back to it, mate. Do you want to explain for people out there that don't know what NEPOPO is? Just give us a brief rundown,
Yeah. So
please.
NEPOPO, it stands for like negative, positive, positive, right? And it's just uh what I think has happened very much throughout the world is that the needle moves too heavily either side, so that you get a lot of sort of quite old school negative reinforcement based, compulsion based training. That's one way, and the reaction to that has been the crazy force free training.
Yeah,
And Nipopo is the fusion of the two, but in a way that is reimagined a little bit. In that, like as I said earlier, Bart would say that I was at one point a Popo Nay trainer, where I would taught things with positive reinforcement. And these days, most people are so good at that you can get away with that until something goes wrong. And then the point of Nipopo is that if there hasn't been a learning phase that involves negative reinforcement, trying to give the dog a correction after the dog has not done what you've asked it to do, a physical pressure correction, is never going to work because the dog doesn't understand what that pressure is. And so what we see a lot in the training space is, those popo no trainers. So they'll teach with positive reinforcement, and they'll use pressure or compulsion or whatever in order to stop behaviors. And that's fine. But the issue becomes when you ask the dog to do something and he doesn't do it for whatever reason. And that day always comes with every dog. At some point, the dog says, "No, I'm not doing it."
yeah,
Using compulsion at that point is not going to get the dog to do it because he hasn't had a learning phase. He doesn't know what to do with that pressure. So the very foundation of Nipopo is that if you don't use some form of compulsion in a learning phase, if the dog ends up learning the behavior using nothing but positive reinforcement, whatever it is that you're trying to teach the dog, then there's a thoughtful and thought out process of layering that compulsion over the top of what the dog already knows. So that if at any point and with every behavior, you can say to the dog, like, hey, I need you to do this. If the dog says, no, I'm not doing it for whatever reason, you can apply pressure in that moment and the dog like goes, yeah, I've got it. And does do the behavior as powerfully and with as much intention as he would have had he chosen to do it the first time for nothing but the positive reinforcement. So that's really the structure of the system. And as I say, there's loads of people who've never heard of Nepopo that use the same, that do the same shit,
Yeah.
right? It just that brand name Nepopo really just means you learned it from Bart, right? Like
Yeah.
it's his system. And of course there's intricacies to it. There's specific orders that you do things in. There's certain like there's certain tricks that we teach the dog in order to develop a foundation, all these sorts of things. But doing all of those is not proprietary. Saying that you use Nepopo is, and really that just carries that significance that you were trained by Bart himself.
Thanks for breaking that down, mate. And
Pleasure.
well, I was at a big trial a couple of weeks ago, and it was thrown around. I'm like, well, wait a minute, let's break it down. So I'm glad you could actually highlight the ins and outs of it there for us.
Pleasure.
Mate, there's a question here from the one and only Shane Chook Fowler, and he's asked, where do you think Australia sits in relation, and we already touched on this, in relation to other countries for quality of dog trainers available for sports dogs and working dogs?
Mate, I think the problem in all around the world is that the grass is always greener, and we always we have in Australia been bringing out Europeans and Americans and all sorts, right, for a really long time to educate us because we felt isolated,
Yeah,
and we were once upon a time, but we're not anymore. In the way the world works these days, we're not. And so I am in the extremely fortunate position of traveling the world and teaching other people. Um, and what I find is that the level of dog training is pretty uniform all around the world. I think
yeah,
that you get really good and you get really shit. And I
yeah,
think that in Australia, we have some really incredible trainers. Like, absolutely, we have in the dog sport space that I'm within, we have some of the most incredible trainers getting around. What we don't have as much is a culture of it,
yeah.
so we don't have as many, like, we're a small, I mean, we're a huge country, but with a small population. And so we don't have as many
We're a drop
trials.
in the ocean.
Exactly. We don't have as many opportunities to demonstrate the capability that we have. But in my opinion, there's some really incredible trainers in Australia and more coming. Um, but as I say, I think the issue is that we don't have a lot of access to the trials and the dogs and the competitions in general. There just isn't a big enough community for us to really demonstrate the capability that we have to the extent that I know that it's there.
Yep.
Um, but for sure, we have some incredible trainers here, and I think we have some natural dog minds in Australia. Like, I think that Australia is, for the most part, still a fairly connected people that understand how animals work and don't too much fantasize the Disney version of animals. um so, like, for the most part, I think that most trainers in Australia are actually pretty good. And we don't necessarily think that, because you see, like, what if you're a pretty good dog trainer in Australia, when you look at your Instagram feed and look at the exceptional dog trainers, if there's 10 of them, only one or two of them are from Australia. But that's just the numbers game of the population that we have, not representative of the skill set that the average trainer contains.
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. And he's got asked another question here is and we're gonna have some fun with this one. What do you think about the state of the industry here in Australia, culture, positive force free versus balance trainers, and what might be our balance trainers' biggest hurdle for the future?
Mate, the biggest hurdle is we're arguing against people who think they're right. So, and they think that not only are they right about what they're saying, but they're morally right. And that's the problem, is that I think the issue I think that there's actually not many people who are able even to decide whether they are a force free or a balanced trainer. And I can say that with some authority because I've been deeply immersed in both communities. And there aren't many people like me who just were exposed to one thing and went, oh, okay, well, I'll take that as like it's solid information, and then exposed to something else and went like, oh, that has counter information. I'm totally willing to, you know, disagree with myself as of yesterday. There aren't many people who have that capability. And so I think as well, there's a lot of people, you know, this could get me into trouble, but there's a lot of people I think in the force free community who, don't have any capacity for moderation. And so their idea of like, if I use a prong collar and an electric collar on a dog, I have the capacity to use that very lightly, or I have the capacity to use that with like a more heavy hand. And I will do which one is necessary to achieve the outcome that I want. And the outcome that I want always takes into account the experience of the dog and all those caveats, right? But some people don't have that. And so what I think the majority of the people that we like who are really force free, like really staunchly feel that way, I think that many of them were abused at some point and can't
Yeah.
understand the difference between like pressure to receive an outcome, you know, whether it's negative reinforcement or positive punishment that has an effect and is just used to achieve the effect versus, you know, like used with poor intention and used,
Or being ridiculed for it.
yeah, yeah, and well, and like a
Yeah.
pressure from which there's no escape. And I think that
Yeah.
like if you grew up in an environment under a pressure from which there was no escape, I could see how you could be totally anti any form of pressure. So I get that. And then there's people who, like I say, who I think that if they were to use any pressure, know themselves that they would use it in a way that was unethical. And I see that because I talk to people. I had people on the podcast who say, you know, the average person, if they were allowed to use an e-collar, would just fry their dog. And I said,
Yeah.
mate, that's what you would do because that's what you think.
Correct.
Right?
It's his perception of how to use it.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
like what I know to be true, is that majority of people who buy an e-collar and spend up to $2,000 on that e-collar almost never use it because they're afraid of using it incorrectly. And
Yeah.
so his perception was that, oh, they'll put it on the dog and fry the dog. And I say, well, like now we know how you have in the past or will continue to use an e-collar. So then there's that. And then there's the sort of worse than them. And this really is like, in my opinion, the scourge is that there's a lot of people who go into the force free camps who are not, right. And they have, you know, if they were from a fairly compulsive training background and they say that they're now positive only or plus R or whatever they call themselves, you develop a certain audience doing that, right? Especially if you've got some good teaching, you are a good trainer, people come on board. And what I have seen for sure, and like, you know, I've spoken to these people, I know this to be true, is that some of them now are terrified of their own fan base because if their own fan base found out how they actually trained,
Right, yeah.
they would cancel them. And so I think that a lot of people have indoctrinated an audience to thinking that they're one thing and now they're stuck. There's no way out. So I think we're in trouble. I think in all honesty, I think like
I don't disagree.
yeah, mate, I am really concerned about it to the point where I had like 12 months ago, I had a bit of a freak out over the whole thing and quit as a dog trainer.
Yeah, right.
Because thing is like I got kicked out of the army with a really bad injury. So like I medically discharged and, you know, had I not broken my back, you would never heard of me. I'd still be in the army. And I would be doing that. I had planned to do that for the rest of my life. And that really fucked with me because like, I actually didn't know who I was if I wasn't that, right? Like I'd been that since I was a 19-year-old kid. I don't know, like if I'm not a commando, what the fuck am I? And it messed with my head and it was taken from me and there was nothing I could do and it wasn't my fault. And then last year when they started banning prong collars in Queensland, I was like, oh fuck, it's happening to me again. Like I'm not going to be able to be a dog trainer anymore. And
Yeah.
so I was like, I'm getting off the ship before it sinks. And so I got a real job. And I didn't last long before I realized that first of all, I don't like jobs. They're shit. I like working for myself. But also like I missed it and I realized, nah, fuck it. I'm going back. I'm fighting and I am going down the ship. But I do think the ship is going down. I truly do. And it will come back. The pendulum has to swing, but I just don't, I don't know how much damage will be done before the pendulum swings and what like my biggest concern is what corporate knowledge will remain in order when the pendulum does swing back, who's left to educate people when it swings back? And then that just puts us back to the start. And we have to relearn this shit, you know, and more dogs have to suffer at the hands of people learning. Well, we've got that. We don't need to do that again.
Do you find it hypocritical that the force-free trainers are ones that, in my experience anyways, ones that apply more force on anyone than anyone else?
Totally. Totally. 100%. And one of the things, like, I've trained with people who claim to be force free, and then when it actually comes to doing it, they're way more compulsive than me. And
Yeah.
I'm like, hang on, like, I'm the compulsion based trainer here, is what you've been telling people, and
Yeah.
I'm more hands off than you. You're like, and you know, they're using a dominant dog collar because the dog's dangerous, or you know, whatever. And I'm like, come on, this is not. It's wordplay, and that's the
Yeah,
issue. Is I think
100%.
that some people who have played the word game too much, and now they're backed into a corner, and they just don't get it. And I think the ultimate, like, you know, it's time to put on the tinfoil hat. But I think the ultimate goal is that we shouldn't be owning pets like that. That's where it
Yes.
goes. Is they and look, there's evidence for that. You know, in Holland, they concluded after looking at those dogs, the KMPV type Malinois, that these dogs were uncontrollable without prong collars and e-collars, and so the resolution was that they should stop being bred, not that you should allow people to use these tools. That those
Yeah, wow.
dogs shouldn't exist.
So let's just extinct them.
Yeah, and like, I think, what, you know, like, I don't think that people think this kind of stuff through, right? So, like, I think that, you know, government, you know, I worked in government for a long time, right? Like, it's so compartmented. Nobody's talking to anybody. It's one of
Yeah,
my bugbear
silos.
with the yeah, totally. It's one of the
Yeah,
bugbears I have with the cops. Is, you know, like, the dog unit will talk about how hard it is to find good working dogs. I'm like, well, you guys are the ones making this hard, right?
yeah,
Like, you're the one, like, especially in Melbourne, you guys ban bite work. So of course there's no one breeding suitable dogs for you, because they've got no market to sell them except for you. And then you only buy a few, and they have no breeding testing ground, you know, like, they
yeah,
have no, so there's all these issues of it. And I think that we are going to find ourselves in difficulty. Like, it's going to get to the point where, first of all, we can't train effectively the dogs that we have, and then we'll no longer have those dogs, but then those working roles will no longer exist. And I think that, I don't think many people who are outside of dogs actually appreciate the work that dogs do. And I know in your world, like, I think I saw recently that a dog is, you know, equivalent to an $80,000 a year employee and stuff like that, right? And
yeah.
certainly that's the case in police and military work, is that the dog is a force multiplier, and the dog, you know, whatever the investment on the dog, whether they pay $3,000 for a puppy or $70,000 for a fully trained, ready to go dog, that's still going to be the cheapest employee they've ever had. Because
100%. It's not going to call in sick for them, right? Or take
yeah,
holidays or
and
ask for
he
super.
eats a few bucks a day in food.
Yeah,
That's it, right?
100%.
He gets his vet check. He might, like, the total overall cost for that employee might be $2,000 a year, and provides a level of capability, like, unmatched by anything else. So, like, I think that that's when the pendulum will swing back. I think, because at the end of the day, when you talk government, all that matters is the money. And so when the bean counters get involved, they'll go,
Red
"Oh
line.
shit, what's happened here?" Right? And that's when the pendulum will swing back.
Budget, budget, budget. And we spoke earlier about, like, we're all products of nature and nurture, right? Our DNA, our genetics, and our education growing up. And well, I've got one of those left wing extraordinaires around here, right? And it's all, you know, it's science based. It's science based, and I find it amazing to go, it's science based, but wait a minute. Even if you observe a pack of wild dogs, you will watch that they apply force and discipline each other within that pack.
Yeah.
So, are you telling me that your science knows more than nature?
Yeah. The thing is, with the science-based argument's a funny one, because I, like, when you say, "Cool, can you show me the papers?" Because
Yeah.
I read them. I subscribe. I get notified when they come out. I read them, and, like, they don't tell me the things that you're telling me.
Yeah.
Right?
It
Like,
and
it's
it's
just
peer
not the
reviewed.
case.
Of course, it's reviewed by someone who has the same opinion as you do. Like,
Yeah. But, like, you know, most notably recently, there was a big name in the force-free space talking about how there was a study that said that, aggression, resource guarding aggression, could be fixed with nothing but force-free techniques. And then you have a
yeah,
read of the paper. There were only 4 dogs in the study. 2 of them were never reassessed. So now there's 2 dogs in the study. And the 2 dogs that, were reassessed showed, like, a decrease by 30% or something like that. So, like, 70% of the time, the dog is still guarding its food. and is dangerous around it, um, like that's not success. That is not by anyone's measure success in a two dog study where 70% of the time the dog is still guarding the food. Like that's so. So I think like very often people will say, "Oh, this and this was the conclusion of the paper," and it's like, cool, but did you read it and did you actually understand it? Like one of the ones, there was one that wasn't trying to draw it was on clickers, but it wasn't in comparison to anything else beyond other markers. And one of the things it said like of no markers was that it was just as effective as using a clicker. Then you look at the behavior, and the behavior is sit in front of the handler. It's like, no shit. Like, okay, but now teach that at distance, right? So like, and have the behavior being looking another way or focusing intently on something else. How are you gonna train that without a marker? Like, I don't like so it just doesn't make a lot of sense. A lot of these studies, they just don't really make any sense. And I put all my weight into the old studies because like pre-ethical standards committees. And look, I'm not saying that studies should go back that way, but back in the day, like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when they were actually trying to learn shit, right? Or when they were actually like, okay, let's figure this out. We've got the data, like we have it, right? Like they've done the experiments. A lot of animals went through a lot of shit for us to get that information. It's disrespectful for us to then say,
I was just going to touch on that.
yeah, it's made it is. It really, I can't think of a better word. It's disrespectful to just say, well, I don't care that we did that in the past and we have that information. I have strong feelings about this. So I choose to go against what we know to be true. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Like, it got me on a rant here, mate. But like,
You're right, go for it.
I think that people who are anti balance training, they don't. It's more about them than the dog. I think as well.
Personal.
Yeah,
right? They're putting human beliefs and human values on a canine, and they're not communicating with the canine as a canine.
Yeah, exactly. But what I will say is, like I know and am friends with and have trained with some incredible trainers who have made the choice not to do that, right? So like for example, this lady, Sarah Brewski, she might be one of the best animal trainers to have worked the face of the earth. And she doesn't use e-collars or prong collars or anything like that. She just says that she is playing the game on hard mode. That's what she wants to do. But she also doesn't do like behavior modification, right? Like she says, no, I don't do that. Like she does a lot of different dogs that do a lot of different things. She's an incredible trainer. But she will tell you like, this is not the best way. I just choose to do it this way.
Get a hard long road.
Yeah.
It's actually funny, that study you mentioned, did they disclose the dog's weight after of the two dogs left at the end of the study?
Nah, that wasn't
because they were
included.
300% heavier, and there was no food aggression because they were too fat and full.
Too fat,
Like,
yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Actually, I'm just going to ask you a quick one, go back a bit here, mate. Your current dogs. You want to talk about your current dogs?
Well, I've got two dogs of my own at the moment. I've got Valerie, who's my Springer Spaniel. I got her, she's 9. I got her as a bit of a project to film. It was when I first started making content and sort of being a person that did that. And I made a video series on how to raise a puppy. And one of the things that sort of always shipped me when I was looking at other people's content was it's kind of bullshit. Like you can tell that like the dog already knows what they're trying to teach, and that so I decided I was going to raise this puppy, and rather than it being someone talking about how to raise a puppy or showing the various stages, I was going to do it. And so I filmed every session and showed everything with her over 12 months. The plan was to give her away.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the plan was to train her sort of as an assistance dog when it was all done and give her away to like a veteran with PTSD or something. But we realized that she'll give you a PTSD before she helps you with it. And so about 6 months in, I realized that I was going to keep her. And so she's my pet, she's my little heart dog. She's trained in a lot of cool stuff, but at the moment, at 9 years old, she's a borderline wild animal. Like, she comes back when I call her and downs at a distance. They're the sort of two behaviors that are non-negotiables for me. But beyond that, she's just a little cuddler. And then I've got my Malinois, Remy. So my dog Remco, he's 6. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of health issues with him. He's just a bit brittle, like he falls apart. Which is a bummer because, like, other than that, he's sort of the dream dog. He's powerful and stable, and he's got nerves of steel, and he's everything that I like in a dog. just unfortunately has had kind of a shortened career just because of numerous injuries along the way. Now, like he's a little bit brittle, but also he's the perfect storm of zero self-preservation, incredibly high drive, and stupidity, you know? So like he regularly he has no concern for his own safety
I've got a
ever.
kelpie
And so
like that.
yeah. And they're the best dogs, but they're headaches.
Oh, yeah, and my dog's had more chiro appointments than I've never had a chiro appointment in my life. In the last,
Yeah.
2 months, I've had, like, 4 chiro appointments, so,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, they're nuts like that, aren't they?
Yeah, for this dog who was given to me as a gift, he certainly has cost me many, many thousands. I'm probably 25K in for this dog that
Oof.
has that
Wow,
was
he is
free.
brutal.
Oh mate, he's yeah, we've had plenty of issues. But he's also like he's
He's
broken a
going
bunch of
hard.
teeth, tore his ACL, but he like degloved his leg one day. Like he just is and sort of continued chasing the bird he's chasing. It wasn't until I called him back that he was kind of mad at me for stopping him. And I was like, dude, you're badly hurt. And he's like, oh right, yeah, okay, off to the vet.
He sounds very much like Mo of mine out there, same
Oh,
thing.
really? Yeah.
Impaled himself on a stump, mate, and kept working. I thought he got bitten by a snake. He's moving around, like, "What's going on?" And I called him back, and he's, like, pissed off that I called him off the sheep, and he looks back at me, and the blood's just pouring out. I call him to him, and he makes it, like, halfway and just collapses, and I'm just like, "Dude, how did you keep going?"
Yeah, it's amazing, right?
Oh, it's nuts,
That
mate, and
singular focus. It's so impressive to see.
that prey drive, like, once you have it there and, actually, there's actually, I'm gonna touch on that in a sec. We're coming back to prey drive. But now with your exposure to so many dogs, how I'm assuming there's gonna be another dog come along. How are you gonna pick your next pup?
Man, that's a really tough question. So
Can't give me the
within
feed.
well, within Malinois, there's a lot of variants, right? And I for a long time was really into KMPV bloodlines, which are like Dutch bloodlines.
Yeah,
And I think in the police and military type work, I think they probably are the best dogs. They're very powerful, very stable. They're power animals. So like the KMPV is the Royal Dutch Police Dog Association. That sport, which is the sort of precursor to being a police dog in Holland, it's considered like for a very long time was considered sort of the standard in what a dog should be in that space. But it's a power rather than precision based sport. And so those dogs are mentally exactly what I want, and I've been super happy with my dog. I love him to pieces. Natural, like, s- like so that his aggression comes from possession, right? So like he's very stable. He's not really scared of anyone. In fact, within our development, we have to eventually at some point get a dog into defense, right? Like the dog has to like be concerned for his life, right? In order to call that
yeah,
dog finished and teach him how to fight through that and turn back into prey. This dog was such a disaster to get into defense because he's just like, why would I be scared of anything? Like how he's like, I can't fathom a situation where I'm not the winner at the end of it. And so it
yeah.
was like he's a difficult dog, but great in that way, right? Um, but he's not as sharp as I think I would like in the future of my next dog. So my next dog, I don't know where I'll get it, and I'm not sure how I will arrange this. I don't know whether I'll import a dog or whether I'll find one in Australia. But what I want is a dog that is as powerful and as stable as him, but has a little bit more nerve and therefore can see the world in a level of detail that he doesn't see. And through doing that, like I want to be able to train the obedience to a level of precision that my dog is not capable of. Now he has very precise obedience. We can do really well. We've got a
Yeah.
lot of titles. It's all there, but he just doesn't
You want
see
something
the
with
world.
you want something with a big vision that doesn't get so
Yeah.
hyped up on the prey drive is what I was gonna ask
Well
next, right?
well, the prey is what I'll need. I'll need a ton of prey, but it's just like it's just a little bit of nerve. Like in Malleys, it's just that they need a little pinch of concern to even be able to take in all the details. Like he's just
Yeah,
I don't wanna say he's lazy. He's not by any but he just doesn't care about enough stuff
yeah.
to see the world in the level of detail that I feel like I want in my next dog. And that like when
Sounds
you
like
get those dogs, they're just sorry, go ahead.
you just explained Sonic the Hedgehog, like, just get from A to B, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, in order to move the way I want him to move and perceive everything, like that's the kind of dog that I want. So, what's been exciting though in Australia is like one of the more established IGP bloodlines. So, like IGP is the sport where you just bite the sleeve, right?
Yep.
That's been very well established in Australia. one of those bloodlines seems to be meshing really well with some imported Belgian ring, like NVBK Belgian ring sport bloodlines. And so, the hard part is anyone can import semen and stuff, but it's having bitches to put it to. And so I've
Yeah.
seen quite a few matings lately, and there are some really good dogs in Australia at the moment from matings like that. It seems to be working really well. So, if we're having this conversation 6 months ago, I'd say that I'd be importing my next dog, but I feel pretty confident I'll find my next dog here in Australia.
Yeah,
But the thing
that's
is as
awesome.
well, like, so like I raise train sell dogs, and the beauty of doing that is I don't do that under a contract. Like I raise train and then the dogs are for sale and you can buy them from the day after I buy them or until I say they're ready and I start telling people I want you to come and assess them. In fact, we're doing an assessment this week of two of the dogs who are a long way from being ready, but people are coming to have a look at them. They're not being tested. They're going to check them out.
Yeah.
So the beauty of that is like, I think rather than, I'm not sure, but I think rather than seeking out a dog for myself, I think one day I'll just fall in love with one of them and keep it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a mad story to tell as well, right? Like, that dog has to kind of steal your heart rather
Yeah.
than you being out focused and then
Yeah. Well, I
whatnot.
mean, and my current dog is the same story. So like he was a dog that I had the option of, I was probably going to sell. I was going to raise and sell him. But pretty quickly just sort of realized like, no, this is the dog I've been waiting 9 years to have. I'm keeping him.
And obviously you gotta enhance like a lot of prey drive. That is very important to you. So how do you go about enhancing that? And if you have something that lacks a bit of prey drive,
Mm.
do you work on that to a degree and then move it on, or is it something you go, no, no, I'm going to keep at this? And how
Yeah.
do you go about that?
Yeah, we do need a lot of prey. And I think, the reality is you can't put in what nature didn't. And so if they don't have it, sometimes it's been suppressed and you can sort of bring it out. Sometimes it's a gene that just needs to be flicked on. Um, but the thing is as well, like the high prey dogs, is certainly what I like, but they're not for everyone. And so
Yeah,
usually in that working dog space, when a dog's, doesn't have the prey that you want, it usually has the defense that it needs. And so it's a different style of work. It just means it's a different style of development. And there's a different market for a dog like that. And if it doesn't have either of those in sufficient quantities, then it's someone's lovely pet. Like
yeah,
that's just the reality. I think there's plenty of techniques to cultivate drive, and I think that drive is a bandwidth, but that bandwidth is determined by Mother Nature, and where the drive that is expressed will be fall within that bandwidth is training. And so I think that usually you can move that needle a fair bit with some fancy techniques and, you can frustrate the dog. There's lots of different things you can do, but there's still a ceiling. And if you hit that ceiling and it's not enough, you can check out the defense and see what that's like. I'm not especially good at using a lot of defense, especially like starting a dog there. It's sort of a more of an older school technique that I know how to do and I've done plenty of, but it's just not where I'm best. It's not where I'm comfortable. So I'm usually better at getting other people to do that.
and
And
what do
there's
you mean by that? Starting a dog at the fence?
yeah, defense. So like defense is a response to threat. And so like for us in the biting dog world, prey, what we hope in a dream world is that prey will bring a dog into the fight, but defense will keep him there. And
Yeah,
so we do a lot of what's called like we call drive channeling, where we teach the dog how to like go into a fight with a person, genuinely seeing the person as prey. We want them to actually look at a person and be like, I am gonna fucking eat you. Um, but first I have to stalk you, chase you, strike you, fucking kill you, and then I can eat you. And but like the reality of a dog that can think that way, they're few and far between. And so prey is usually enough to bring the dog in. But then when things get real, it's defense that'll keep it there. And so more sort of older school techniques are a lot more defense heavy, where right from the jump, we're looking to bring out like aggression as a
yeah,
response to a threat. Now, that kind of dog, that's a different style of development. And done by the right person, at the end of the day, you can't tell the difference. When the dog's finished, that it is what it is, right? But it certainly is a different type of work. And the problem is, if you overdo it in prey, all you do is just make the dog more crazy. And you can go into frustration, and frustration can lead to aggression. So you're still sort of on the right path. The problem with working in defense, if that's where you have to start, is that what comes after defense is avoidance. And so you can, if you're not good at it or you're not skilled, or just some dogs, like the margins just aren't there.
Applying too much pressure,
Yeah.
falling the other way.
Yeah. And so, as I say, like you can't call a dog finished unless it's really capable of jumping in and out of those two drives and feeling quite comfortable in both. But it's just not my preferred place to start in defense and bringing real aggression. If that's what's going to bring the dog into the fight, there really isn't anywhere to go after that. And as I say, like, I'm not saying that that's wrong or shouldn't do it, or is a lesser dog. It's just a different dog. And these days, in sort of the modern battle space, that's it's a tougher dog to put into a place, because it's a harder dog to handle. It's not harder, it's different. So, like, especially within the special forces and SWAT teams that I work for, they can't employ a dog that's actually aggressive like that. Like, it's just too unusable, because it's too dangerous, too much of a headache.
Too much
And
management involved, right?
yeah, and like, you know, too much of there's too much risk associated with a dog that, typically a dog that's been worked in defense won't work for many people, right? So, like, he has his handler and that's kind of it. And what
Yeah.
they need in those SF teams is they're multi-handled dogs. Many of the dogs have multiple handlers, and what they really need is actually that the dog identifies with his entire, especially in the army, the dog kind of needs to identify with the entire platoon and say, like, hey, I have a handler, but all you guys, like, I've kind of put together that we're hunting together, and anyone who gives me good advice to putting me on track, I'm totally willing to listen to. So they're very open to information that leads to the positive outcome. Whereas more of those defensive dogs are a bit more like, hey, don't fucking tell me what to do. And
Yeah.
so they're a little bit harder to work with in that kind of environment.
And then away from the military, back to like say, like a family environment, they're the ones I probably trust a little least with.
Yeah.
They're harder to switch back off. Like,
Yeah.
back in the 80s, my grandfather bred Rottweilers, and we had a couple of dogs like that.
Yeah.
And they were dogs that didn't get socialized with the young kids much, right? Because they were like, yeah, you can turn it on and off, but what happens if one day it turns on itself?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And like, that's not to say, those heavy prey dogs, that has its own risks. You know what I mean? It's not without risk.
Yeah.
But it's different risks. It's different risks. And so, like I say, there's not a right or a wrong. It's just there's different flavors. And I think your imprinting and your development really decides what kind of flavor you're into. But these days, like I say, in the working space, like, if you're going to sell a dog, selling a really defensive dog is tricky. There isn't a huge market for it.
Yep.
In the, like, police and military space, I think in the guard dog space, there's a huge market for it, right? Like, that's what you want, but
Yeah.
that's not the market that I'm working in.
And you're talking about that prey, that chase, that hunt, and that person, otherwise known as a decoy, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What makes a good decoy?
There's
In the
kind of-
room by training, I suppose.
yeah, there's 3 ingredients to being a good decoy, right? The first is being fit. It's really hard. The second is being not afraid of dogs. That's actually one of the key sort of gateways that a lot of people don't realize they're as afraid of dogs as they find out that they are when they're at the biting end. Yeah. And you could, because you have to remain in control, and to the dog it can become real, but to you it's not, right? Like, you're in a suit of armor that the dog can't, like, you're in the bite suit, it can't hurt you. I mean, it fucking hurts, but it can't injure you. And so I think being able to maintain that composure is really important. So being fit, being not afraid of dogs, and being able to take direction. After that, anyone can learn it. There's an element of being able to read a dog. Like, if you're going to be a development decoy, we kind of have 2 stages of decoys, or maybe 3. The first being like a development decoy who will actually, help bring the dog from not knowing what it's doing to being quite powerful and capable. And that's probably the hardest one, because it's you like, there's different styles, but the style I kind of prescribe to is that, like, I want the dog to know, as his development decoy, that it's quite safe from me. Like, I have no intention of hurting you. I'm teaching you how to fight, and I want that dog to really understand that, like, I'm the karate instructor. I'm not the person you're fighting in the street, right?
Yeah.
And then the next after that is like a trial decoy who's going to test that dog. So, like, I am a certified trial decoy, but I, like, the overwhelming majority of what I do is developing, not testing. Because the testing is the street fight, right? Like, this is it.
Yeah,
This is we're
100%,
going to
that's
do
right.
it. right? So where you fall in those two, like I know some trial decoys who are great and absolutely, if I need a dog tested, they're who I'm sending them to. But I wouldn't fucking let them anywhere near my young dog.
Make or
Right?
break a dog, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, and they're gonna test. They're not gonna make. They're only gonna attempt to break,
Yeah.
right? And there's a role for that, absolutely. But that role is for when I've decided, like as the development decoy, like, hey, he's good, he's ready to go. Let's put him out.
What about decoying your own dogs? Like a lot of people do that, right? Is
Yeah.
it? I do it myself, right? I'm not
Mhm,
gonna. Like,
mhm,
I do. I muck around. We just hear muck around for our mouths.
mhm.
Um, but is it? Can we negative have a negative effect on what we do?
Yeah, for sure. So, like, decoying your own dog, there's a point of diminishing return, and where that point of diminishing return is different depending on the dog and the person. And it's not just a dog thing, and it's not just a person thing. It's the combination of the two. So, if you're developing a dog in prey and it is very, uh, it's very, like you're working with the dog, right? If it's a very developmental, it's very appetitive to the dog, like everything's going well, and you're just teaching skills, then there's no risk, right? But
Yeah.
you can't finish your own dog.
Yeah.
You can't put the amount of pressure on a dog and teach the dog how to overcome that pressure, how to turn off that pressure, and that pressure come from you. Then you start introducing different levels of risk. So for some dogs, depending on how and why they bite, the point that you should not decoy for them might be like my own dog, for example. Like I did like a lot of his development on myself. And if I put on a suit, he'll happily bite me. It's fine, right? Like we're playing a game together. It's no different from me wearing a tug. But he stays very much in prey and never goes into a fight. And I need that of him. And times when I have like pushed him to try and like he doesn't bite me anywhere near as hard as he bites someone else in a suit. And so, like the times that I've pushed him to bite properly, it stresses him badly because he's like, this is not like I don't want to fight you, right? Like I'll play the tugging, biting game, but I don't want to fight. So you hit that point of diminishing return with some dogs. So with my own dog, that was probably like 2 years old, right? Where I'm like, I can't get any more from this, right? He now bites. He's been taught and developed to bite with real aggression. He wants to fucking hurt who he's biting. But he doesn't want to do that to me. So there's no value in doing that with him anymore. Some dogs, that's 8 weeks old, like some dogs are immediately like, hey, like this is real for me. And so then you get a cause conflict in the relationship. But even for the dogs that like just doing scenario based stuff, one of the things that I find myself often encouraging people saying like, hey, I know you did all the development and I know that's all sweet. And I'm not saying don't decoy your own dog, but you're hitting the point now where you're showing the dog too many pictures that result in you getting bitten. And so, like, there's certain exercises like the object guard and stuff like that, which are like you're teaching the dog to guard shit from you and to bite you, right? And so there's been plenty of cases of sort of people who are very good dog trainers, but have come into that biting sports world and not understood that. And so even though you're totally working your dog in prey and there's no pressure on the dog and you're just playing tug, you are rehearsing solving problems via biting the handler. And
Yeah.
so there, as I say, there becomes a point where it just doesn't, there's more cons than
Need to
there
go
is
further.
pros. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's it. Like there's probably no risk in developing your own dog, but there comes a day where you go, I've got what I can get. It's time to bring in outside eyes. And I think that's one of the things that's for sure necessary in developing a dog. Like I have a close relationship with a good friend of mine, Cole, who's easily the best decoy in Australia, without a doubt. And like he will finish my dogs because I can't finish them. He has a higher skill set than me for sure. But even if I were a better decoy than him, which I'm not, but even if I were, I would still require him or someone like him to finish the dogs because someone has to be the real boogeyman. Whereas
Yeah.
like my dogs who I'm developing and have done all the work and I don't handle and I just am the decoy for, they'll never really see me as the boogeyman, right? So I
Yeah.
need someone else to fill that role.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And mate, I just want to give you a bit of a plug there. Unfortunately, I can't make it to your next one.
Oh yeah, you're gonna come along, yeah.
I'd love to, man, but you don't want my kids around. They'll drive everyone nuts. But you're running decoy workshops there,
Yeah.
and like free decoy workshops at the moment, mate. That's awesome.
Yeah. But so the game I play is called PSA, Protection Sports Association. It's
Yeah,
America's answer to ring
that's my
sports.
next question.
Yeah, so I've been banging my head against a wall trying to get that going in Australia for about 6 or 7 years, and we're getting going. It's taking off, and I realized I was doing a couple of things incorrectly. First of all, I was trying to recruit people from other sports, and that was probably not the wisest thing. They're already doing their thing. Um, but the main thing I realized, the barrier to entry is, well, PSA, the barrier to entry is the nerve of the dog. You can use any kind of dog. You don't need any pedigree. You can use any whatever, but it's fucking hard, right? There's a lot of pressure, and so the dog has to be strong. So there's that as an issue. But we don't have that many decoys. So you get all these people who are really into it and are like, fuck yeah, Pat, I'm on board. I want to play this game. Who can help me develop my dog? And I'm
No
like,
one to
oh,
bite.
no one. There's no one around. So me and Cole both decided at the end of last year when we had a trial and he wanted to trial, but me, him, and one other or two other are the only certified decoys in the country for that game. And so I ended up like, there's 3 bite scenarios, and Jazz, who I work with, she did the carjacking, which is like the hidden sleeve bite. And then I had to do the handler attack and the courage test. Like I had to be running in between because I was the only one certified to do it because Cole's the other one that could do it. And so he
Yeah.
wanted to show his dog. So that's when the 2 of us got together and we're like, fuck, man, we got to teach more people this. And that's what we realized. That's the real barrier to entry, is people who don't know how to do it. And there aren't schools in Australia to teach that. Like there isn't a place you can go, like other places in the world where there's courses on it and stuff like that. Like it's really hard to find someone who's willing to teach you and, access to those people and whatever. So that's when me and Cole decided, well, we can't keep complaining there's no decoys when we have the capacity to train more, and we haven't. So we've set up these days. We do it every month, just one Sunday a month. We get everyone together, and we're working through sort of a program on developing people to be more than their actual skill set on doing it, because one day is not that much, right? But
Yeah.
what we're really teaching people is the thought patterns around doing it, and the process around doing it, and showing people, because one of the things that developing a dog is boring as shit. Like it's so boring that there's no video of it because it's so boring. When if you watch someone doing a session with a young dog, you'd say, what, like it's a rag, and like there's nothing, right? And
Yeah.
so there's no content to teach people how to do that. But what there is plenty of content is finished dogs doing crazy shit. And so when people get online and they're like, okay, what's this bite sports about? How do I become a decoy? All you see is monster dogs slamming into people and getting beaten with the stick and big drives and whatever, right? And then people go out and do that to 5-month-old puppies, and it's the end of them. And so that's why we're like, okay, we're going to take the time. We're going to actually educate as many people as we can slowly and thoughtfully about how to actually develop a dog, and develop themselves in order to become a trial decoy, so we can get more trial decoys and we can help grow this game.
Mate, that's awesome. Like you're investing back into your sport, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And PSA, like we just touched on it. So effectively, is it 3 different bite scenarios, or?
Yeah, so PSA is this really fun game, right? So it's only 20 years old, so it's one of the more modern bite sports in the world. And the way it works is there's a PDC, which is the protection dog certificate. It's a very basic obedience test, and 3 bite scenarios. Just a carjacking. It's a carjacking because that's a safe way to do a hidden sleeve bite. That's the only reason. And then a handler attack and a courage test. Then you go on to your level 1. Now the obedience is much more difficult. And the big difference about PSA is it's always like what we call like contested obedience. So there's always a decoy on the field. So in the level 1, he's just sitting in a chair. But by the time you're in the level 2, throughout the entire obedience routine, you've got 2 decoys like harassing you. And then the way it works is the game basically gets less and less structure the more you move into it. So that by the time we're in the level 3, there actually really is like, there's no scenarios that you know of. You don't know how many times your dog's going to bite. You don't know how it's going to go down. It's totally that the judge has a list of criteria by which you're going to be assessed, but how that assessment is going to go down is totally up to them. So they create scenarios.
Yep.
So the beauty of it is it's really fun because you don't know how it's going to go down. So like in some sports, like in IGP, for example, which is the German, like that's the sort of Schutzen, the original sort of sport.
Yep.
Your changes of position, sit down, stand, are going to happen with you facing the dog. The dog's going to be on the field. He's going to do his changes of position. In PSA, you don't know how the fuck that's going to happen. You're going to be told to do it, but you don't know how that's going to go down. And, that could look like at one point in a trial I saw there was a door placed on the ground. You had to heel your dog up to the door, put it on a down, and then 4 decoys picked up that door and were walking around holding your dog on this platform, and you're in a hidden position so the dog can't see you, and you have to be calling out your changes of position, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah, so it's the generalization of all the skills. So like IGP is, it's a beautiful sport, but it's like they have like the blind search, right? So the blind search in the bite work, there's 6 blinds. The dog has to search each one, and then the helper's in the last one.
It's the
And
same every time.
yeah, and it's not a bite, it's a bark and hold. So what you're demonstrating is, look, my dog will search these areas. He knows full well the guy's down there, but he'll search. And he's not going in with like uncontrolled aggression. He's going in there to bark and hold, and then there'll be a bite after that. So it's like a demonstration, because Schutzen was originally a breed test, right? So it's like, demonstrate your dog has the capacity to do that. Cool. Okay. Now PSA is like, okay, but really search something. Like really search. So now there's like multiple cars on the field, and there's a decoy in one of them, and the judge will say, okay, there's a decoy in one of those cars. Send your dog to a guard on that decoy. And so it's the same shit, but it's the like actual application of it. It's the generalization, right?
It's close to real world scenarios.
Yeah. And they've, of course, like that's what we have to be careful of, because it's not real. It's a game. And like, all that shit. Like I'm not into protection dogs. Like my dog, I don't need a dog to protect me. It's a game. Like we're playing a game.
Yeah.
But as you say, there's scenarios that are just fun to play out, and they're fucking hard. And the beauty of PSA is that it's a handler's sport, because it has to go down, in a way that you won't know. There's surprise scenarios. There's, even though there's like all these criteria, like your dog has to be able to demonstrate, you have to teach your dog so much stuff that you'll never be assessed against, in order to have control mechanisms to get the dog through the scenarios, right? So like, yeah, and you've got to think like you're playing chess on the field, where you have to be thinking like, okay, like what are the controls I have to get through this? Like, where are my dog's strengths? Where are my dog's weaknesses? How am I going to manage my dog through this scenario in order that he doesn't bite that decoy without permission, and in order that he does bite the one that I want him to bite? And like, if you ever look at any of the higher level trials, it's carnage on the field, like to the point where you just think, fuck, how is it, like, what is happening here? Like, and how could anybody control a dog in that level of arousal? That's why I love it. It's fun like that.
And where can we go, or like what can we watch either online, or where can we physically go to watch one of these trials?
If you check out the PSA, it's psacanine.org, I think it is, psa-canine.org. And there's trial footage and all kinds of stuff on there. There isn't, as like we were discussing earlier, there isn't a good place, because everybody uses social media, and social media is falling apart, and videos get deleted, so like there isn't a central hub beyond the PSA website. But yeah, it's Protection Sports Association, psacanine.org, and that'll have videos and the rules and all kinds of stuff. And it has the clubs. There's like 4 clubs in Australia at the moment. Couple here in Sydney, one in Queensland, and one down in Leeton. And we're growing. I think more and more people are realizing how fun it is, right? And
it sounds pretty cool. I want to get out and watch one myself.
Yeah, it's good.
The
only issue with PSA is, like, as a spectator sport, is if you're not actually there to see the judges handle a meeting to tell them how it's going to go down.
I understand.
You have no idea what you're watching. Like, when you're watching it, you're like even I, as like a person who really knows the sport, if you're watching a level 3 scenario, you have no idea how that's going to go down, and you don't know whether the dog's doing good or bad, because you don't know what the dog's meant to be doing. Right? So that's the problem as a spectator sport. If it's not live, it's not great.
Yeah. Very good. And you mentioned about sending dogs out. I was having a conversation with someone during the week about like sending dogs in directionals left and right. You're obviously very experienced with an e-collar. How would, obviously you teach your dogs directions, right? So getting out left, casting them out right. How do you go about enhancing that with an e-collar?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? So directionals for us are kind of different than they would be for you. So directionals for us are the choice between two things or multiple things rather than going a particular way. Now, like the way that we teach that, like it can be enhanced with the e-collar, but for the most part, the way that I teach directionals is a little bit unorthodox. Is that we start at 180 degrees, like we teach go
Yep.
that way, go to the things. But then eventually they have to come in together to the point where there is some discrimination happening. And the way that I teach that, it's the way I was taught, is I do it on a back tie or a flex pole, and I
Yep.
use two balls. And the thing is, like a ball that is identical to another that is 6 inches further away from the dog than the other one is not discernible by the dog at the 5 meters you have from the dog. And so, well, the way I do teacher directionals is like I have my hand signals, which I develop, really broadly. But when there is conflict, where I tell the dog, "Hey, I need you to do this, get this one," but the dog's like, "No, I'd rather get that one. That one's better." That one's not actually available. And what I would do
Yep.
in that moment is like let the dog try as hard as he wants. And the way that I need a dog to feel about that, because of the draw that will come later in the type of training or like the real world scenario, is that I don't want the dog ever to think I'm telling you you must get that one. What I want the dog to think is I know something you don't. I'm telling you that the other one is not available to you, right? And that
Yeah.
you can try as hard as you want. I'll let you. I'm not mad at you. You can fucking pull into that back tie forever. You ain't gonna break it, and you ain't gonna get that ball. But the moment you change your mind and get the other one, I'm gonna reward you. And then if you actually wanted that other one, you got to bring that ball that I made you get to me. And then I'll let you get the other one anyway, right? So there's no conflict. Well, I want to bring that down to zero. But the way that I enhance that with the e-collar is in the dog's attempts to be getting the wrong thing, I might be stimming at a really low level. Not that would motivate the dog off the ball, but that would make trying to get the ball somewhat
A little
uncomfortable. And the
uncomfortable.
moment he changes his mind, I turn that pressure off. And what I'm doing when I do that is that I'm programming that dog to understand this e-collar's guidance to the right track. Right. And that's what I want the dog to think of it as. Like, I don't want the dog to be like or else, right? I
Yeah.
want him to be like,
I
hey,
want you to switch it off, right? I get back into avoidance.
yeah, exactly, right? So I want the dog to think like this e-collar is telling me something. And so that's what I would do. If and when the dog is attempting to get the wrong thing, I would be nagging it. Not telling it, but just saying like that's not right, man. Like
Yeah.
you're on the wrong
And
track.
just tap, tap, like you would
Yeah,
on a lead. Tap, tap,
exactly.
nag it away.
Exactly. And the moment he changes his mind, he's straight into the right thing, or it turns off. And so now he's doubly motivated. First, that's sneepo po, right? So he
Yep.
turns off the negative reinforcement of trying to get the wrong thing. He points that at the right thing. That immediately turns off the pressure. And then in doing that, he gets reinforced for getting it, brings the ball back. We play the game, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually having this conversation with someone a couple of weeks ago, and they asked about how I would do it. So I got no idea, but I'm talking to Pat Stewart in a few weeks. I'll ask him, and I assumed it's something similar to that.
Yeah.
I do similar stuff with my own dogs. There's a couple of things I do, but not directionals. But obviously, like we're casting dogs out, and we start in a small space, and then a bigger space and bigger space. We've got people that kind of want to fast track a bit,
Yeah.
and the idea of collars and even taking on principles from the working dog and pet dog world into stock dogs is really, I see worlds colliding a lot
Yeah.
now,
Heaps
and
of
the
overlap.
thirst for information like is just
Yeah,
brutal.
heaps of overlap. Man, I think the key thing with directionals, but also many of the behaviors I teach dogs is like the type of dog I like is not afraid to come up the line, right? Like I like really dangerous dogs. I like really
Over the
spicy,
top.
impulsive dogs. That I really enjoy the company of those dogs. But I don't ever want them to come up the line. I don't want that to happen. But I like a dog who has that within him. So as a result, the way that I try and reduce as much conflict as to zero where I can. All right. And so very rarely am I ever saying to the dog, hey, you have to do this. What I want to tell the dog is like, hey, man, I know something you don't, right? Now I'm
Yeah.
telling you, it looks like there's two options, but I'm telling you there's only one. And if he doesn't believe me, I let him find out. Like I let him try as hard as he wants. And that's the role of the back tie. He doesn't look and see I'm holding the leash. Like I'm like, mate, I'm not involved in this. Now he
It's your
probably,
decision.
yeah, exactly, right. But like, hopefully, he doesn't have the cognition to realize, like, oh, this motherfucker set this whole scenario up and does it like, you know what I mean? He doesn't have that.
Yeah.
But what I want is like a really supportive relationship with the dog where he looks at me and says, this guy has good advice rather than this guy is forcing me to do shit I don't want to do. And teaching directionals as well as many, many others behaviors in a similar way. I find not only has a much more lasting effect on the behavior, it actually works when you want it to work, but also like it's just a nicer way to train with a dog, and it ends up in a better, like less combative, safer relationship with a dangerous dog.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got a massive toolbox there, obviously, right? You got so many tools, techniques there, and like talking about one there. And this is a question for myself rather than anyone else, but you've got such a wide range of training techniques. How do you go about keeping yourself grounded and not going down a particular path and then pushing that? And then or sometimes does that happen and you go, wait a minute,
Yeah,
nah, I can see this happening in this dog here, and let's go back this way, whether it's the
yeah,
force free or the Nepo Po, or whatever it may be.
yeah. Um, I train with other people as much as possible. That's the main thing, right? And I think that it gets really easy to just sort of put the blinkers on. We had a guy come to my club at the end of last year, a guy from India actually, who was an incredible decoy, and um, he was working all the dogs in my club, and it was like watching someone else bang your girlfriend. He was doing such a good job, and I was like, oh, like, and he had all these tricks that I didn't have, and was achieving all these things that I didn't achieve. And so I think, and it was great. Like I loved it, right? Because, and he wasn't doing anything necessarily that I didn't know how to do, but it was just that you get into a rut. You do the same shit with the same dogs all the time. I know
Yeah,
this works. I know the techniques. And so I think it's really important. That was definitely a strong lesson for me is, like training with multiple people and seeing fresh eyes on different things. And also just being really open to the idea that someone else knows more. And like, that's like, in my case, it's very often true, right? Like I take the assumption that whoever I'm training with is actually a much better trainer than me, which very often is the case, thankfully. And I want to sort of explore what do you know? Show me how you do it, right? Like I'm genuinely interested in how you do it. And then that just goes something that's, if it is better than mine, it goes into the Rolodex of things that I can choose. And if not, then it goes into the Rolodex of like, okay, given a sort of set of situations, maybe it is what I do, or maybe now I know for sure what I'm not going to do. Like all of those different
yeah,
things. But I think um, I enjoy very much training with other people, especially if I can get keep myself around people who are better than me, and really like I look at other people's trainings not to find what I don't like about it or anything like that, but genuinely to figure out like how effective is this and is it replicable by me and others.
and be open minded, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I've mentioned on this program before, one of the best learning curves I ever had was by a 15-year-old fella. He said to me, "Is it true if you think you're the smartest person in your room, you're in the wrong room?" And I just went, "Wow,
Makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely." Like that just stuck with me. Like I heard that about a year ago now.
Yeah.
One of these young fellas down at Rough Track, and I was just like, "How come a 15-year-old boy that's kind of off the rails? How did you just have that influence on me?"
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And just being, like you said there, just being open minded to the people around you.
Yeah, for sure. And the beauty of dog training, mate, is the results speak for themselves. Like dog training is, I think, more than anything else I've ever experienced, a meritocracy. If you can get your dog out and it works, people want to know how the fuck you did that. It's as simple as
Yeah,
that. Right. And so
absolutely.
like that's the way it goes. So the proof is in the pudding. And when you see someone pulling something off, especially something I enjoy quite a lot is like looking at someone's training and going like, I don't, this isn't gelling. Like I'm not into this, but watching their dog be phenomenal. And then I'm like, okay, but I have to get to the bottom of this because this doesn't look intuitive to me. Like I don't expect, like, I don't expect to see the results that I'm seeing from this training. So I am missing something here. I have to figure that out. And it's harder and harder to put myself in those situations, but when I do, I love it. It's great.
Absolutely. Mate, as we start to wind down, you mentioned the canine paradigm before, you
Mm,
and your co-host there, Glenn Cook.
mhm.
Mate, what's obviously you got a stack of episodes out there now. I learned something from everyone. How'd that come about?
Mate, I think we've been going about 5 years now. We're 240, I think, something episodes in, something like
250
that.
something, mate.
250. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Um,
The
so
last two, absolutely. Well, I mentioned to you
yeah, I'm
before,
glad to
just
hear you like them.
so connected.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, mate. So what happened, Glenn? There's a guy, Josh Moran. He had a podcast that he hasn't done in a long time, but Glenn was on it, and I think it just gave him the bug.
Yeah.
So he hit me up and was like, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?" I was like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, I can talk, right? Like, why not?" Um, and we had a couple of false starts. It took us a while to get going, and then we eventually did. And I think we were lucky in that we were at the right place at the right time. Like, it's a very saturated market now, but it wasn't 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think as well, like the conversational, like it's just us talking shit to each other,
Having
really.
the
And we
art.
get guests on all the time, but it's just us sort of talking. And I think we were at the right place. I think that if I started that today, we would know we wouldn't be able to develop an audience like we have, because I think there's plenty of choice already available. And um, but we did, and so we're super lucky. I think Glenn posted yesterday, or day before, something like that, that we've just had 2 million
Yeah.
listens or something like that. And so it's been incredible. It's completely changed my life. And I've gone from being a person in my area and very much within my niche, who's known and is understood to be capable at what I do, to now being a person who has thousands of people around the world who are looking to learn from me. And so, it's changed my life. It's changed me from being just a local dog trainer into a person who travels the world teaching people and has incredible opportunities, to learn from others in the process of doing that. So yeah, it's a spin out. It still blows my mind that it was as successful as it has been. I always feel bad for like anybody who would be trying to start as a listener now, because there's so many in jokes and there's so many like, they're like we have such fragrant disregard for if it was someone's first time listening to the show. Like
Yeah.
that's the negative feedback that I get. But beyond that, it's all
It's
pretty
kind of
good.
like watching Home and Away. You got to like go back
Yeah,
heaps of episodes to kind of, yeah, you're kind
exactly.
of on the same storyline, but you got to go back a bit.
Exactly. That's actually a very good parallel.
Oh, I love Home and Away, mate. Like, Alf's like, he's an idol of mine. No, but congratulations there on that, mate.
Thanks, man.
Like,
Appreciate it.
it's great. You've had all your listens there, and like you said, like you said, you can't believe, but I'm sure like you're teaching people every day. You only get out what you put in, and you put a heap of effort into it,
Yeah.
and you're just reaping the benefits of that. So
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing it. And I mean, beyond the success that's come of it, I've had some pretty incredible feedback, like some really personal, like because we talk about a lot beyond just dogs, and I tell a lot of like personal anecdotes. And I'm a really lucky person in that I had kind of a wild history, but am very unaffected by it sort of mentally. And, I've had a lot of feedback from other people in the army and veterans all around the world and stuff, saying that that's helped them a lot. And there's just been a
absolutely.
lot of really positive feedback beyond making people better at training dogs for free. There's been a lot of, maybe improving the quality of life for some people, which makes me really happy.
100%, man. Even away from, if people think training dogs is just about having a dog there, it's not. It's about personal experiences
Yeah, totally.
and a lot of the psychology behind dogs. It's no different to what we're going through every day, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Like
100%.
experiences, how we've dealt with them, and working that. Like so. Anyways, we could go on for hours and hours about that, but anyways, mate, was there a question tonight that you would pick for that would strike your interest? There's a couple there from Nikki and Shane, and they'll win a bag of Enduro Hindgy food for working dogs with real kangaroo meat.
Nikki was asking about puppy development, right?
She was.
That'd be the one, I'd say. She'd be
Nick,
the winner.
congratulations, Nikki. I've got your details. So bag of Enduro coming your way. Obviously, I understand you know our mate at Enduro, Paul.
I
So
do know
there's a
Paul.
bag coming your way as well, mate.
Oh,
So
amazing.
thanks for jumping on tonight.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
That's all right. I'm not going to let you go that easy. Laura isn't here.
Okay.
However, I'm going to ask Laura's question. All right,
Okay.
and it is, um, if you had to choose between fighting 20 horses the size of ducks or one duck the size of a horse, which would you pick and why?
Um, I'll go 20 horses, the size of ducks. It just seems more manageable.
More manageable.
Yeah.
Love you.
I
Love the
feel
answer,
like
mate.
I could handle that a lot. Yeah. I think one giant duck would freak me out. Yeah.
Yeah, and Remy could have lots to eat as well, there, mate. So
But if he was involved, it'd be all over in a heartbeat. I'd do nothing. I'd be a
no, that's
spectator in the fight.
there you go, mate. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Much appreciated. To everyone listening back, thank you. And please remember, we learn every day, and the day we stop learning will be a sad one for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers,
mate.
mate.